All right. We finally got him live in Lake Tahoe, Las Vegas, Reno, somewhere making money. Ben Tribbett. Follow him at Not Larry Sabato. Ben, good to have you, man.
Good morning, John.
Hey, Ben, I had to get you on. That's why we've been bothering you today. Christopher Newport University poll just out. I already called your mom's friend, Susan Platt, up. Asked her on my show tomorrow. Told her I was wrong. Told her you were right. So this poll comes out. She said 20%. Justin Fairfax, 11%. Gene Rossi, 6%. Christopher Newport University poll. Ben, you are my number one Democratic analyst. What is going on?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure that anyone knows who any of those people are yet, and so probably what's driving it, and I think that you're going to see the lieutenant governor polls be extremely, extremely volatile up until May. But if I had to guess, John, the vast majority of primary voters are women in a Democratic primary. And so there's a built-in infrastructure to women where if you put a woman's name in the poll, that they're going to move up. So how many of those people know Susan Platt versus how many say Susan? Oh, I'm for Susan. We just don't know. I mean, remember that in other states in the last few years, there have been Democratic primaries where the establishment has gotten behind, a state rep or a state senator, and the whole state doesn't know them, and they lose to someone who spends $200 and doesn't have a campaign because, the other person has a name that someone recognizes or, fits a certain demographic. That's what happens in down-ballot primaries. And so, don't overanalyze it yet, but just know because women dominate this primary that Susan Platt is going to be in this race all the way until Election Day.
Ben, okay, let's look at it backwards then, right? Because I see what you're saying, but then I'm shocked that Justin Fairfax, after running for this office for 60 months, is at 11%. I just find that to be a shocker.
Well, Justin's number is a little bit lower because, and his number will move, but here's what's going on. Justin talks about how he got 48% of the vote in the Attorney General's primary and almost beat Mark Herring.
Yes.
A big chunk of Justin's vote in that primary was there was a couple of primaries that went on in Hampton Roads in heavily African-American areas that were for local offices. And those local primaries were driving, in that year, huge turnout. And when people came to the polls, they didn't know who was running for statewide office. Now, in one of the primaries, they had a Hampton Roads candidate named Ralph Northam, and he did very well in those cities because they actually recognized his name. In the other primary, they didn't know. Justin manned those polls, and I think that people said, okay, Justin Fairfax. And he surged in those localities. If you look, his biggest localities were where there were local primaries going on. My point is, John, sometimes you get votes. It doesn't mean that you're driving the turnout. And it doesn't mean that you have name identification. It means that of the voters who came out for someone else, they selected you while you were there. So I've always said, Justin's performance was overrated in terms of his performance as a candidate and more driven by what else was on the ballot that year. And, frankly, if those local primaries, if you took out those localities where that was getting driven, Anish Chopra got more votes than Justin Fairfax did. But it was because of those couple of localities where people knew Ralph Northam's name and then they voted for Justin Fairfax while they were there, that Justin got more votes than Anish Chopra.
Interesting. Okay, but you do have to agree with me that no matter how you want to spin this one way to Wednesday, it's still good news for Susan Platt, right?
Oh, it's awesome news for
Awesome
Susan
news
Platt. Because she's going to say she's ahead, and
Yeah.
she's now got credibility.
Right. I got her on my show tomorrow. I saw this. I called her up. I'm like, I'm a believer. You're at 20%. I don't care how you got there. And the other thing is,
the piece of it that's going to help her the most, John, is that it's going to shock. This poll will shock people and cause them to, right now you saw earlier this week that Jerry Connolly endorsed Justin Fairfax. I think last week Dick Saslaw endorsed Justin Fairfax, and it's because I think a lot of people were starting to bet that Justin Fairfax was going to be the nominee, without any data, without anything to back that up, just sort of the same gut feeling that you had, that he ran last time, he almost won, it looked like he was going to win again, and so they were endorsing him. And now what Susan's going to have is, if people see that, wow, Susan Platt can win, people are going to start endorsing Susan. So, there's no question that the race is on its head. Now, again, I would put a huge asterisk next to this poll right now, just because no one knows who any of these candidates are yet. Susan will continue to grow in the electorate because a lot of women will vote for her as the only woman running. Especially when some women find out about her credentials, and they're extensive. And Justin will continue to grow. And I think this will be a very competitive primary by the end of it. That's my prediction.
I think you're right. I don't think there's any question about it. But Platt definitely in the running. I remember you brought her into our Boys Are Back in Town segment in December. I think it was in January. It was the first or second week in January when she announced her candidacy right on my show right there. Remember that? And that was what? That was
John,
January, February. That was 3 months ago.
There's a chance Susan Platt to be the next lieutenant governor.
I mean, yeah, these are very good numbers for her. I got her on tomorrow. I'm a believer. Also, Gene Rossi at 6%. I had him at 75-1. This is now not 75-1 odds. This guy's got a shot.
He's got
a shot.
Everyone has a shot because voters haven't tuned into this yet. And here's the piece of it, John, that I think is most important. When you're down ballot from the governor's race, the lieutenant governor's primary is completely different than when you are standalone, as Ralph Northam was with the attorney general's race in 2013. Two down ballot primaries, they stand together. A governor's primary is going to drive all the attention, and the lieutenant governor's primary is not going to get people to focus until the last 2 weeks.
Right.
And so anything that happens before that is just sort of noise.
All right, good news for Platt, no doubt. Let's get to the Democrat primary. Tied, Northam, Perriello, 26% each, 45% undecided. Now, tell me if I'm right or wrong on this. I think this is a disaster for the Northam for Governor campaign. Ben, I don't think they're going to win. I've been saying for 2 weeks now, Perriello's going to win this race. I'm convinced of it. After these numbers come out, look, 45% undecided. I mean, Ralph Northam has been the lieutenant governor. Everybody knows who he is. He's been banging a gavel. He was on a statewide ballot. He ran a competitive race, won that. He's been in the news. He's been there for 3 sessions now. He's a great guy. And why would you be undecided? I think they're in big trouble. And I'll tell you the other thing that doesn't feel good to me about the campaign, 2 things. One, I don't think they still haven't figured out what to do with Tom. And that's always bad when you're running out of fear. The second thing is they seem to be running as far to the left wing, progressive wing of your party as they can. And I don't think that's who Ralph Northam is. I don't think he's credible there. I think he's credible when he's center left and he's for pipelines and things like that. I think they're running a campaign that people are saying, if I want the far left-wing Obama guy, I'm going to go with Tom. I think they're going to lose. Tell me I'm wrong.
I think you're probably right. But at the same time, John, this poll shows what the first 2 polls showed. Now, the Perriello people are spinning this as an 11-point surge because the first CNU poll said that Northam was up 11. All the other public polling we've had so far said the race was tied. This says the race was tied. That tells me that the first CNU poll was what was wrong. I think this race has been tied since it started. I don't think it's moved. And what I'm seeing on the ground, and as I live up here in Northern Virginia, where there are a lot of primary voters, and probably where this primary will be decided, I am seeing a lot of attendance at political events. I am seeing a lot of people tuned into politics that have not been tuned in before because of Trump, but they are not necessarily decided between Northam and Perriello. They're just paying very, very close attention, and they're attending things and they're listening. And I think, again, we're probably a month out from being able to really see which way those voters decide to move.
Well, look, I'm not a consultant like you are, so you would know best. But as a layman, and that's what I am, I'm a layman. As a layman looking at this, I would think if I'm Perriello and the closer I can get to Election Day tied, I'm going to win because my voters are more motivated. And this is also like the revenge of the non-establishment. Like every time the establishment in your party now gets behind somebody, they go down in the polls, right? Fairfax picks up Saslaw and Connolly, and he sinks.
Right. Well, I mean, I think that part of what's driving that is the Democratic Party does not have a really strong grassroots organization. These indivisible groups that are meeting are showing up with 10 times as many people as, who shows up at Democratic committee meetings usually. So, the grassroots has always been much larger than the party, and now that they're really getting engaged, the party infrastructure doesn't matter. That doesn't mean that it's necessarily a negative to be part of the establishment. It just means that it has very little positive.
All right, let's get to the governor's side. Perriello's going to win this race. I'm just telling you that straight up. Let's get to the governor's side on the Republican side.
And I think, John, I'm not disagreeing with you, but I just think that this thing has to play out for like another month or so.
I don't like the campaign. I don't know what they're doing. I just like they're reacting to Perriello. They're on defense. I think the pipeline decision to not come out in favor of the pipelines when Perriello blasted it, 74% of Virginians are in favor of it, and it means all these tens of thousands of good jobs, and it's the right thing to do, and it cuts all ideological boundary. And McAuliffe is for it. I think the fact they didn't take a stand on it told me right there they don't know how to deal with this guy. And I tell you, when you don't know what to do with your opponent, you lose. Okay, Republican side. This is turning into a blowout. Gillespie, 38%. Wagner and Stewart, about 10%. Also, Wagner losing in Hampton Roads, 29-23. Plus, I'm estimating Gillespie's going to spend $2 million in the final 3 weeks on TV. I would if I was him. That's just my estimation. How does he not be the nominee?
Gillespie's headed towards the nomination. I agree with you. That's not a competitive primary right now. I do think that Corey Stewart will close the gap a little bit as we get closer. But it's just right now he doesn't have the money or the infrastructure to be able to make a serious run at Gillespie.
And what about Wagner?
Wagner's been a non-factor from the start. I mean, he's a regional candidate, and you can't get elected governor as a regional candidate.
But he's losing his region.
Well, that makes it even worse, doesn't it?
That's not a good thing. I mean, I think the worst news in this poll for Senator Wagner is he's losing Hampton Roads 29-23 to Gillespie. I don't know where you go from there, so they're going to have to figure it out.
In fairness, John, a few years ago, and it's driven by some retirements, that number has gone down. But there was a time where 24 of the 40 state senators had all lost a statewide race. So maybe Wagner's trying to bring that tradition back to the Senate where, we have a majority of senators that have run statewide and lost before. Because he'll be there with Bryce Reeves next year, who also have lost a statewide race now.
Well, let's get to that race. The CNU poll has Jill Vogel 17%. Very surprising. Glenn Davis 13, Reeves 10. But the good news here for Davis is, number one, he's in striking distance. Number two, he's carrying Hampton Roads big, 26-16. But then Reeves not doing particularly well anywhere except Southwest. Is it over for Reeves?
No, it's not over. But the problem with Reeves is that he's made himself so unlikable with all this talk about a lawsuit that his room to grow is probably the lowest of the three candidates. I mean, I said before, John, it was almost as if his strategy in talking about doing the lawsuit was more about trying to get money for himself than it was about the health of his campaign on your show a few months ago, because it's just devastating. And any political advisor that's telling him that it's good for him politically has gone mad. He looks mean. He looks a little bit unhinged. And even if he's correct, it is devastating for him politically. It's a terrible way to introduce yourself to people.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the gambit was getting Vogel to drop out, and then when that didn't play out, because there's no lawsuit that I can see, so I think Reeves is in trouble. Now, Vogel's got the same deal going on as Gillespie. I mean, she's going to drop $1.5 million in the final couple of weeks. I don't think Glenn Davis is as vulnerable on Medicaid expansion as he was because of what just went down with Ryan Care that was funding it. Obamacare is funding it. People like me have now questioned that whole strategy because the Republicans are funding it. So I want to take what they're funding. So I don't think he's as vulnerable on that as he was. Does Davis have a shot, or is Vogel the clear front runner?
I think Davis has a shot partly because we haven't learned yet. Bryce Reeves has obviously planned a suicide, but the question is it a murder-suicide? And, we saw the same thing in the Republican presidential primary when Chris Christie did his, legendary murder-suicide in the debate. I think that, if you're Glenn Davis, you want Bryce Reeves to continue to go after Jill Vogel because that's your path. And it's opened up a path for Glenn. Now, I think the RV thing and every some of the stuff he's doing is a little bit chintzy. But that even said, chintzy works down ballot. And so, give him some time to continue to get around the state and have Bryce Reeves beat up on Jill Vogel, and Glenn Davis absolutely could be the nominee. I do think Jill Vogel is far and away the best candidate. It's pretty obvious to primary voters she's your best candidate. And so, that is the toughest sell for Glenn, is even as she's getting beat up, she's so obviously beyond the other two candidates that anyone that's voting on electability is going to vote on Jill Vogel.
Well, Ben, we're out of time, but it's very possible we could have two female lieutenant governor candidates squaring off. Susan Platt.
And we've never had a female lieutenant governor.
I know. It's going to be very interesting. And so I thought Fairfax was a lock. I thought he was the overwhelming favorite. This poll, I know you can't read a lot into it. If I'm running the Fairfax campaign, it's not a good thing. And
right.
I really don't think the Northam campaign has figured out how to position their candidate, and they're run out of time, and they're going to lose. This is the John Fredericks Radio Network. I want to thank the #1 Democratic and political consultant of all time, Ben Tribbett, for being with us. You want to follow Ben on Twitter at @NotLarrySabato. Ben, it's always good to have you on, man. I miss you. Now I'm going to be in Northern Virginia. I'm going to be in Washington, D.C. for 2 weeks. We have to get together. But the Freudline says, well, if you're going to the casino with Ben, I want to go. So I don't know if we can do that, but we definitely have to get together when we're up there.
Absolutely.
And I'll be up there the next 2 weeks. Thanks, man.